This business of building for peace is a very grim business, and it has to be worked for day in and day out. The very foundation and purpose of the Atlantic Pact is to bring these freedom-loving peoples together in such a way that they can prevent another war.
For nearly 70 years, NATO has ticked along nicely. Everybody's understood the shape of the deal. But now change is in the air. During his campaign, Donald Trump suggested the US wouldn't come to the aid of its European allies unless they paid more towards the cost of defence. Behind the scenes in the alliance, that's caused a sense of crisis.
I want to keep NATO, but I want them to pay. I don't want to be taken advantage of. We don't want to be the stupid people anymore, okay? We don't want to be the stupid people anymore.
I used to.
Was that just campaign rhetoric? Many in NATO feel Mr. Trump has to make things crystal clear now.
It will only be put to bed by the strongest possible signal from the new president after the 20th of January that America will, no ifs, no buts, no prevarication, come to the aid of a NATO member if attacked. And if that doesn't happen, there will continue to be doubts about America's willingness to do that under President Trump. And that will strike right at the heart of NATO's founding principle of collective defence.
So potentially, is this the end of NATO?
It will certainly rock the alliance, and the foundation of the alliance is Article 5. And if there is any doubt about that, then it could spell the beginning of the end of the alliance.
Seeing trouble ahead, the British have been trying to bridge the gap between Trump and their European allies. Earlier this week at a NATO meeting, Boris Johnson started the business of cajoling those who spend too little on their defence.
It is absolutely vital that everybody steps up to the plate and puts their money where their mouth is.
From the European point of view, there's been a reluctance historically to support certain presidents, Reagan, Bush, or now Trump. But look at it from the American perspective. The Europeans have consistently underspent on defence throughout the last 30 years, taking it from a point where the US used to provide about half of the alliance's defence spending to one where it's now 75% American.
This was a change election in the United States. We have an administration with a very different outlook on a lot of issues, and so there will be change, and I think allies have to be prepared to adapt, but hopefully at the same time persuading the new U.S. administration that NATO is a valuable asset for the United States.
There are 28 countries in NATO, and all are committed to a target of spending 2% of their GDP on defence by 2024. 5 of them already do: the USA, Greece, the UK, Estonia and Poland. Some are moving in the right direction. But when you look at the bottom 5, including some of the alliance's richest economies, they're spending under 1% of their GDP on the military, less than half the target, with little chance of meeting it. Add to the disagreements over resources, arguments about Russia, and you have a growing crisis in the alliance. President Trump wants a reset of relations with the Kremlin, and if that means de facto recognition of Putin's seizure of Crimea, or indeed allowing him free rein in the former Soviet Union, the divisions will get even more profound.
Basically ratifying the results of Russian aggression in Ukraine, I think, would perhaps buy you some short-term tranquility, but in the end it would create a much more unstable situation in Europe, encourage the Russians to continue to press forward for some kind of Yalta II with a new division of Europe into spheres of influence, which I think would bring back some of the instability that we saw in previous decades.
NATO is now preparing forces to defend the Baltic republics, part of the alliance, but once part of the USSR. If NATO doesn't make a credible pledge to defend them, might that encourage a Russian move?
There must be absolutely no doubt about the imperative of defending, protecting NATO territory. There can be no discussion or deals about zones of influence, new Yaltas and that sort of thing, because that strikes right at the heart of what NATO is about.
You always have to be prepared to walk. You have to be.
It would be easy to blame Donald Trump for undermining NATO, but European defence cuts have been going on for 25 years, often in the teeth of US objections. If there are tricky times ahead for the alliance, that's because many members now see things quite differently.